Today, the Supreme Court is getting a lot of media coverage for what should have been an expected decision. And the decision was that if you come to this country illegally, but are granted temporary protected status because your country is a horrific place to return to, then you don't get a green card and you don't get to become a citizen because you still came to the country illegally. Now, this is confusing and baffling some people. There's a whole lot of little finer points of immigration law that we can go through here with all different kinds of statuses. But at the end of the day, the Supreme Court has upheld that if you enter the country illegally, you don't suddenly get a path to citizenship because you are granted a temporary status. The idea of temporary is still temporary. Let's take a little deeper dive into this and see what's going on. I'm Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. I'm a lawyer. I'm also a legal and political commentator on YouTube and on Odyssey. Wherever you're watching, hit the like button, hit subscribe, turn on your notifications so you don't miss any videos. Okay, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about a recent Supreme Court decision. So recent, in fact, that it's today. Today is the decision. And here's the New York Times headline: Supreme Court rules against immigrants seeking green cards. Listen to the propaganda. These are not immigrants seeking green cards. These are illegal entrants into the United States who have been granted a mercy because their country is so horrible to return to. They get temporary protections. That means they're allowed to stay in the United States and work with a legal status, but it does not mean that they're admitted into the country as immigrants. They're not. They're just protected from deportation and allowed to seek gainful employment and pay taxes while they're here. That's a vastly different thing than an immigrant. In my opinion, a legal immigrant goes through the proper status. And there's actually some possibility of overlap here that we'll get to in just a minute. You can get temporary protected status as a legal immigrant as well. And those immigrants do actually still have a path to a green card and citizenship, because shockingly, if you do things the legal and appropriate way, then you get to enjoy the benefits of citizenship maybe at some point in time. Or you get permanent resident status at some point in time. This is how it's supposed to be. You have a legal process for immigration. You follow the process and the legality works out. If you don't follow the process, you don't get rewarded. You shouldn't be. You shouldn't be. And people can have all sorts of opinions about immigration, about illegal immigration, about U.S. immigration policy. Yes, it probably needs reforms and tweaks. I've talked about several of them in the past that I think comport with strong national security, but still allow for some modernization and some smart changes to the immigration system. But until Congress gets together and acts, we're stuck with what we've got. And as long as what we've got is written down by Congress, the court should not be changing it. And that's what's going on here. The justices said immigrants with temporary protected status who entered the country without authorization may not apply for lawful permanent residency. Okay, so what is this? This is similar to something called asylum, but it's not the same thing. Okay, it's not the same thing as asylum, but it's similar. The idea is that some people who are here in America from a country that has safety concerns going back to it, an unstable regime, religious persecution, natural disasters complicating the ability of the nations to be stable, to provide food for its people, all of those things, those types of typically temporary disaster instances, those things are given what's called a temporary protected status, those countries. So in this case, we've got a couple from El Salvador, and they came here illegally in the 90s. Then in the early 2000s, there was a big earthquake in El Salvador, and it caused instability and problems. As if El Salvador was a stable place in the 90s. But that being said, let's go on. It caused instability at a level where the United States decided to grant a temporary protected status to El Salvadorans. So you might have some people who are here on a legal visa, a work visa, a visitor's visa, or whatever. Then the earthquakes hit, homes are destroyed, there's nothing to go back to but instability. And the U.S. says, okay, you can stay here. We're going to give you a temporary status. But once that temporary status is gone, and that's on the whole country and all of its residents who are here, once that temporary status is gone, they need to go back to the legal immigration process, or they need to get out. If they were unlawfully in the country, they will be subject to deportation. Again, simple concepts. This is a temporary status. It says, all right, because of humanitarian concerns, we're not going to send these people back. We're not going to require them to go back home under the legal status, right? Like if you have a required return on your student visa, for example, we're not going to require you to return. We're not going to deport someone who doesn't have a required return, but they shouldn't have been here in the first place because there's too much instability. But once that's over, you're going to have to go back and follow all of the existing law. A lot of people think that that's not how it should be, which is kind of baffling to me, but nothing should surprise us in immigration law anymore. So here you go. The case is Sanchez versus Mayorkas, and it could affect tens of thousands of immigrants. It was brought by Jose Sanchez and Sonia Gonzalez, natives of El Salvador, who entered the United States unlawfully. Notice they've changed it from illegal to unlawful, right? Unlawful entry, not illegal entry, because illegal, it sounds too mean. It sounds too mean. So they get a temporary protected status. It shields immigrants from parts of the world undergoing armed conflicts and natural disasters from deportation and allows them to work in the United States. And again, this is something that we actually do want for these types of people, even if they're here illegally, because we're not going to be able to deport them. There's a whole lot of law that suggests that when things are too bad in a particular place, we don't deport people. It's similar to asylum, like I said, and there are all sorts of reasons for asylum. This is just a broad sort of aspect to it. Again, humanitarian concerns. But the idea is, if we know who's here unlawfully, by giving them this temporary protected status and allowing them, basically a social security, an ITIN, an immigrant tax identification number, then we can allow them to work. We can have them pay taxes, contribute back to society while they're here, and then once that status is gone, they get to go. Now, how long does a temporary protected status last? Well, that depends. And as you can see, this is in 2001. We're now 20 years into it, and we still have the same amount, we still have this temporary protected status. So, they were granted protection under the program in 2014. They applied for lawful permanent residency, commonly known as a green card. After their application was denied, they sued. Court of Appeals upheld the district court ruling, saying no, you don't get to just stay. And in a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court, they decided the same thing. And here's the really important stuff here. The admission requirement is twofold here. You have to be inspected and admitted or paroled into the United States. If you come here unlawfully, you're not inspected and admitted. All right. And it adds that people who had worked in the United States without authorization, as Mr. Sanchez had before he was granted temporary protected status, are eligible only if their presence in the United States was pursuant to a lawful admission. So if you come here, you start working without authorization, which means you're not paying taxes, you're not on the records, you're breaking the law, you're not going to be eligible. Sorry, too bad. Don't break the law. That's the rule. It's like the law says not breaking the law is a good thing. It's amazing. So the other relevant parts of immigration laws, Kagan wrote, allows immigrants, whether they entered the country lawfully or not, to apply for temporary protected status or TPS. So the government may designate a country for the program when it is beset by especially bad or dangerous conditions, such as arise from natural disasters or armed conflicts. The country's citizens, if already present in the U.S., may then obtain temporary protected status. That status protects them from removal and authorizes them to work here for as long as the designation lasts. So it can merge together. Lawful status and admission, as the court below recognized, are distinct concepts in immigration law. Establishing one does not necessarily establish the other, but you can have both. And that still remains. If you're lawfully in the country and temporary protected status comes on, guess what? You get to keep going down your lawfully admitted track. You get to keep following the law. That temporary protected status doesn't disrupt it, and this decision doesn't affect any of those people, even though the headline makes it seem like the Supreme Court ruled against all immigrants, which is ludicrous in and of itself. The reality is a temporary protection is just that. It's temporary. It does not immunize you from your unlawful acts prior to the temporary status, and it doesn't work for people who subsequently enter the country and are granted refuge under that temporary status either, if they do it illegally. We do want unlawful immigrants to be registered and to go ahead and contribute to their tax portions of society. I mean, we're giving them various benefits and access to other things that taxes pay for. The least they can do is have some withholding, just like the rest of people working. That's a good thing. And then once that temporary protected status is up, they need to go ahead and go back to their countries post haste. Sorry, you broke the law. I have lots of compassion for people who enter illegally, and I want them to safely be returned to their home countries as soon as possible, because that's what the law says. You and I have to follow it. Everybody else should too. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Tell me in the comments below. Until next time, peace. Peace.